Kyle stared at the envelope in his hand. For a man who had once signed billion-dollar contracts without blinking, it was odd how much his fingers trembled now. He read the results again, slowly this time, as if a second look might change the truth staring back at him in sterile black ink. Probability of paternity, 0%. The room didn't spin. It collapsed. His breath caught. For a brief second, all sound in the world seemed to mute. The distant hum of city traffic outside. The slow tick of the clock on the wall. The soft chime of a phone he didn't answer. None of it mattered. Because in that moment, Kyle Moreau realized he wasn't the father. Not of the boy he had sung to in the womb. Not of the child he had named. Not of the family he thought he had built. Before we go deeper into Kyle's story, let me welcome both new and returning listeners. You're watching Mr. Ross' Story Trail, where we don't just tell stories, we hold up mirrors to the heart. If you believe in second chances or know the weight of hard choices, make sure to subscribe now and hit the like button. Your support helps us share stories that matter. He had it all. Wealth, power, love, but a single sentence in a medical report shattered it all. What would you do if someone you trusted with your whole life kept the biggest truth from you? Kyle had conquered markets, outrun scandals, and rebuilt empires, but nothing prepared him for a lie born inside his own home. Stay with me, because what happened next isn't just about betrayal. It's about what love dares to become when truth destroys the ground beneath it. He stood in the doorway of the nursery that night, barely able to step inside. The walls were still soft blue. The name Alaric hung above the crib in wooden letters Kyle had carved himself, back when hope came easy. The child inside shifted in his sleep, tiny fists curled beside flushed cheeks. He looked nothing like Kyle, but that hadn't mattered. Until now. Maris didn't know he had seen the results. She walked in moments later, barefoot, hair loose, holding a folded baby blanket. She froze when she saw him standing there in the dark. He turned slowly, eyes heavy, not with anger, but with something deeper. Loss, confusion, disbelief. "Tell me," he said quietly, voice like ash. Maris didn't answer right away. Her lips parted, then closed again. She looked down at the blanket in her arms as though searching for words sewn into the threads. "I was going to," she whispered. "I just didn't know how." That's when Kyle knew the truth was real. He didn't need more proof. It was there, in the way her voice broke, in the way her hands trembled, in the way her eyes begged not for mercy, but understanding. But all he could feel was the fracture, not just between them, but in himself. He wanted to ask why. He wanted to scream how. But more than anything, he wanted the truth to be wrong. What happens when trust is broken not by cruelty, but by love? What happens when the person who gave you the world is the same one who buried a truth that could destroy it? This is not just a story about wealth or DNA. It's a story about the kind of heartbreak that only comes from those we never expected to hurt us. And the kind of love that demands more than forgiveness. It demands a choice. Kyle didn't leave that night because he stopped loving her. He left because he didn't recognize himself anymore. The man who built cities in silence and closed deals before sunrise. He suddenly couldn't answer the simplest question. If the child isn't mine, why does it hurt so much to walk away? The truth had been handed to him in numbers and clinical terms, but it was never about that. Not really. It was about Maris. It was about the version of her he thought he knew. Pure, honest, transparent. And now, there was a shadow where trust used to be. Even still, part of him wanted to turn back. Part of him wanted to ask questions, to understand, to fight for the family they were building. But pride is a quiet thing. It doesn't roar, it whispers. And that whisper convinced him to pack a bag. To close the door, to vanish without goodbye. This is where our story begins. Not with a love story that blossomed in perfection, but with one that cracked under the weight of truth. Because sometimes the deepest wounds don't bleed, they echo. And sometimes the road to healing starts not with forgiveness, but walking away. The city of Aspen Heights was a place people looked up to, literally and otherwise. Steel towers kissed the clouds, while glossy rooftops hosted fundraisers, tech launches, and occasional scandals. Among them all stood one name, etched into glass, whispered in boardrooms, and debated in business schools: Kyle Moreau. His rise wasn't inherited. It was forged, through deals made in silence, through risks most men feared to name. Kyle had founded Moreau Innovations, a tech empire built on artificial intelligence, clean data, and systems that made other systems obsolete. While others fought for a piece of the market, Kyle built new markets. At 38, he was already the name other billionaires whispered with half respect, half jealousy. But if money defined his empire, distance defined the man. He rarely appeared on panels, never accepted awards, and only gave interviews to charities, especially the ones he funded quietly, never with cameras rolling. His staff described him as private. Investors called him deliberate. The press, frustrated by his mystery, often resorted to inventing headlines that never stuck. What most didn't know was that Kyle's silence wasn't strategic. It was personal. He had been raised in a family that valued power more than people. His father, a retired senator, once said to a 14-year-old Kyle, "Affection is a distraction. Build, lead, win, then love, if you still have time." Kyle never forgot that, and for years, he followed it. Women came and went, elegant, beautiful, but distant. Kyle never shared the parts of him untouched by money. He never invited anyone past the lobby of his guarded inner world. That changed the night he met Maris Dane. It wasn't during some flashy product launch or black tie summit. It was at a community fundraiser, a modest evening organized to rescue a struggling neighborhood theater on the verge of shutting down. Kyle's foundation had sponsored the event through a local grant officer. He hadn't planned to attend, but something that week had made him restless. A new merger had gone through. A stock valuation had surpassed projections, and still, he felt like nothing meant anything. So, that night, he left his penthouse without security detail, without announcements, and walked into the worn-down hall alone. The place smelled of old curtains and fresh coffee. The chairs squeaked. A local jazz trio played in the corner. There were no name tags, no titles, just people. That's when he saw her. She was seated on the edge of the stage, legs crossed, notebook in hand. While everyone around her mingled, Maris seemed lost in her own world, sketching something on paper with quiet intensity. A strand of hair kept falling across her face, and she pushed it back, with the same motion, over and over, unaware of how gently she moved. She wasn't dressed for attention, no designer label, no flashy jewelry, just soft colors and quiet grace. Kyle noticed all of it, but it wasn't her appearance that held his attention. It was the calm in her. Everyone else seemed to be performing. She was just present. He found himself standing near the stage, pretending to examine a silent auction table, though his eyes kept drifting back to her. Eventually she looked up and caught him watching. Second, nothing was said. Then Maris smiled, not out of politeness, but as if to say, "I see you. Not your reputation, not your wealth, just you." Kyle hadn't been seen like that in years. They spoke near the punch table, awkwardly at first. She asked what brought him to a theater fundraiser, her voice light and playful. He said, "Curiosity." She raised an eyebrow. Curiosity or guilt? He chuckled, surprised by her ease. "Is there a difference?" She grinned. "Depends on the size of your donation." He didn't answer, just took a sip of coffee and replied, "How much would keep this place alive?" She blinked. "All of it?" Kyle nodded. That was the beginning, not of a business deal, not of a calculated romance, but of something that would quietly rewrite the meaning of legacy. For both of them. Maris wasn't impressed by titles, and Kyle learned that early. He tried, once, to offer her a ride in his town car after a rehearsal ended late. She declined, saying she preferred the silence of walking home. He sent flowers the next day. She returned them with a note that said, "Thank you, but flowers wilt. Come back when you have time to listen instead." So, he came back, not with gifts, not with gestures, but with time. They met on Tuesdays and Fridays, sometimes in the back row of the theater, where she scribbled lines for a new script, sometimes at a bookstore tucked between a bakery and an old tailor, where they read aloud to each other from novels that had nothing to do with business or art. Kyle said little in the beginning. Years of self-protection had made silence his armor, but Maris never rushed him. She listened, not for answers, but for what he wasn't saying. And slowly, Kyle let parts of himself surface, pieces buried under decades of performance. He told her how his mother left when he was 9, how his father never said, "I'm proud of you," how even his greatest triumphs felt quiet inside, how sometimes he stared out his window at night and wondered if success had cost more than it gave. Maris never offered pity, only presence. And presence, for a man who had once measured worth in market share, felt like the first honest currency he'd ever known. One evening, she invited him to watch her students rehearse. They were messy, full of mistakes, and often forgot their lines. But their laughter filled the room like a warmth Kyle hadn't felt since childhood. Maris stood in the center, guiding them with a calm, firm kindness, never overcorrecting, always lifting. He sat quietly in the back, watching her hands move as she explained rhythm, character, emotion. She was in her element. Later, as they walked outside, she turned to him and said, "You're not as quiet as you think, you know." Kyle looked over. "No?" She nodded. "Your silence speaks loud. But not everyone listens closely enough to hear what it's saying." He didn't answer, but his fingers brushed against hers as they walked. For a moment, neither of them pulled away. Weeks turned into months. They never announced they were together. There were no headlines, no soft launches, no social media trails. Just the gentle thread of two lives beginning to wrap around each other. Kyle changed. He didn't abandon his company, but he no longer treated it like a fortress. He started showing up at community events, not with press, but with Maris. He laughed more. He listened more. He gave away things he once thought defined him. And he fell. Not quickly, not recklessly, but in the way a man does when he finally learns what love looks like beyond reward. In private moments, he would trace the back of her hand with his thumb while she read, or leave notes tucked into her favorite novels, simple things like, "This chapter reminded me of you." She kept them all in a small tin box labeled, "Proof of Gentle Things." They moved in together after 2 years, not because it was expected, but because not doing so had started to feel like keeping something good too far away. By then, Kyle had already updated his will to name her as his partner in both personal and philanthropic trusts. He didn't tell her. He didn't need to. For once in his life, legacy wasn't about empire. It was about continuity, about family, about finally choosing something for himself, not the headlines. But as deeply as Kyle loved, he also feared. And fear, when left unspoken, can sleep beneath even the sturdiest foundations. He had never told Maris about the diagnosis. The one from years ago, the quiet appointment in Switzerland, the sterile voice of a doctor explaining numbers, possibilities, and outcomes. "You have less than a 1% chance of biological paternity. It's unlikely you'll father children without assistance." He had buried that truth, not because he didn't trust her, but because it embarrassed him. It made him feel defective. And Kyle Moreau was never supposed to be less than anything. He thought he had time. He thought maybe, one day, he'd explain it, when it mattered, when if became when. But sometimes, silence waits too long. Let me ask you something. Would you fall for someone completely outside your world, like Kyle did? Someone who doesn't care about your wealth, status, or history, but only wants the real you? Let me know in the comments below. I want to hear your story. And if this story has already pulled you in, don't forget to share it with someone who values connection over perfection. The morning started like most others. Kyle brewed his own coffee, even though there was staff who would have done it without question. He said it grounded him, gave his hands something ordinary to do. Across the kitchen island, Maris leaned against the counter in one of his shirts, her face unreadable. He didn't notice it at first. He was scanning emails, half listening to the local news playing in the background. But when he finally looked up, he saw something different. Stillness. She wasn't drinking her tea. She wasn't scribbling notes in her planner. She was watching him, eyes wide but soft, like she was carrying words too heavy to say casually. He put the tablet down. "What's wrong?" Maris hesitated, just long enough for his heart to drop. Then, gently, she reached into her sweater pocket and pulled out a small envelope. It wasn't sealed. Inside was a folded white slip, the kind that carried medical news in the most unceremonious way. Kyle took it slowly, glancing at her before opening it. His eyes scanned once, then again. Pregnant. Confirmed. There was no flourish, no fanfare. Just a single truth. He looked up, mouth parted, the beginnings of 1,000 thoughts tumbling behind his eyes. But before he could speak, Maris whispered, "I'm sorry I didn't say it sooner. I needed to see your face when it became real." Kyle didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped back, leaned both palms on the countertop, and breathed, deep, careful, as if the world had changed and he needed a second to find his footing again. Then he smiled, slowly, disbelievingly, and when he looked at her again, something behind his eyes broke wide open. "I didn't think I could ever have this," he said. Maris nodded, her own voice shaking. "Neither did I." From that moment forward, Kyle changed. Not outwardly, not at first. The suits stayed sharp. The schedule remained packed. But inside, something shifted. He read parenting books in secret at night, ran searches on childhood development and nutrition, sent anonymous donations to education funds and prenatal clinics. When Maris joked about a theme for the nursery, Kyle responded with a full blueprint. A week later, he'd hired a designer, not one from a catalog, but a specialist who worked with handcrafted woods and non-toxic fabrics. "This isn't just a room," Kyle told him. "It's the beginning." He didn't say beginning of what, but he felt it in his chest. Something ancient and electric, a chance to rewrite everything, a reason to become more than what he had built. Maris watched the change quietly. She didn't need declarations. She saw it in the way he touched her stomach even before it had grown, in how he stopped checking his phone when she spoke, in how he began planning long weekends, walks, and trips that had nothing to do with work. She once caught him standing at the doorway of the nursery, long after midnight. The lights were off. He wasn't doing anything, just standing there. "Kyle?" she whispered from the hallway. He turned, startled, but calm. "I heard they can start hearing voices early," he said. I wanted him to know mine. But beneath the joy, there were small things Maris noticed. Moments when Kyle would fall quiet at checkups. His eyes would drift when doctors spoke about hereditary traits or prenatal screenings. He'd change the subject quickly, offer to grab a drink, suggest music for the ride home. She chalked it up to nerves. After all, no one really feels prepared. And yet, something about his silences felt not empty, but full. Full of what, she couldn't say. Still, she didn't push. Kyle was showing up. That mattered most. Kyle became consumed with preparing for the baby, not out of panic but something deeper. Devotion. He started sketching furniture layouts during meetings, quietly asked his driver to reroute past schools and parks, evaluating proximity like a man hunting for the future in street signs. His calendar, once bulletproof, began bending around prenatal appointments. Even the board noticed how quickly he'd end calls or postpone strategy sessions with a soft, "We'll pick this up tomorrow." When his assistant asked if there was a scheduling error, Kyle simply replied, "There are things I can't miss. This is one of them." He installed a rocking chair in the nursery himself, refused help. Hands that once typed merger contracts and touched billion-dollar algorithms now pressed screws into wood, slow and careful. Maris watched from the doorway, arms folded, smile caught somewhere between awe and disbelief. "This is not the man I met 2 years ago," she teased gently. Kyle didn't look up. That man didn't know how to make room for anyone else. He leaned back, testing the motion of the chair. It creaked, softly but steadily. A quiet rhythm. "I'm not perfect," he added, voice low, "but I want to be ready." They filled the closet with soft onesies and tiny shoes neither of them could believe someone would ever grow into. Kale held up a baby hat once, sky blue with little ears stitched on top, and stared at it for a long time. "What?" Maris asked, watching his eyes narrow slightly. He shook his head and smiled. It's just real now. He paused. I never thought I'd get this, but some nights told a different story. There were moments when Kyle would stir in his sleep, murmuring things Maris couldn't make out. Once, she woke to find him sitting at the edge of the bed, head in hands. You okay? She asked. He nodded, but the nod came too quickly. Just thinking. About the baby? He hesitated. About being enough. She reached out and rested a hand on his back. You already are. But even as he leaned into her touch, she could feel it. Some internal battle he wasn't ready to name. In the weeks that followed, their lives swelled with hope. Baby shower plans. Long talks about names and traditions. Kyle suggested Alaric, a name he'd once read in a book about kings who led with principle, not fear. Maris loved it instantly. They painted the name on the wall above the crib. Simple, clean lettering. Kyle ran his fingers along it the next morning, as if trying to memorize it. One afternoon, they walked through a quiet part of the city together, hands clasped. Passing a window display, Maris stopped. It was a photo series of families, adoption stories, blended households, guardians raising nieces and nephews. The caption read, "Love builds families. Biology is only the beginning." She stared at it longer than she expected to. Kyle followed her gaze, but said nothing. His jaw was set, eyes focused, but unreadable. Maris turned to him. What are you thinking? He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. Just how far we've come. That night, Kyle stood in the doorway of the nursery again. He did this more often now. Watching, thinking, holding things in. The mobile spun lightly above the crib, casting shadows on the wall. The room was still, perfect almost, and yet Kyle's shoulders were tense. He whispered to the quiet, "Please let me be enough for him, even if I can't be everything." The evening had been planned with the best of intentions. Maris had suggested it, half out of optimism, half obligation. "You haven't seen your brother in months," she said gently. "Maybe it's time." Kyle hesitated. He always did when it came to Marius. Still, he agreed. For her, for the baby. They kept the dinner small, just the three of them. No press, no formal dining staff, just home-cooked plates arranged with casual effort in Kyle's private residence. Marius arrived on time, but even his punctuality felt loaded, like an unspoken challenge. He carried himself the way some men do when they've stopped pretending to play nice. His words were smooth, but there was always something sharp beneath them, a reminder that resentment doesn't always raise its voice. "So this is domestic life," Marius said as he stepped inside, glancing around the tastefully lit space. "I didn't think you had it in you." Kyle offered a polite nod. "People change." Marius gave a soft laugh. "You mean Maris changed you?" Before Kyle could reply, Maris emerged from the kitchen, smiling warmly. "You must be hungry. Come sit." They ate in the sunroom, light spilling through the glass panels overhead. It should have been pleasant, peaceful, but Marius had a way of steering peace into discomfort without anyone realizing it right away. About halfway through the meal, after compliments and small talk began to fade, Marius leaned back in his chair and sipped his wine slowly. "So," he said casually, "you two went the natural route? No IVF or donor plan?" The question came too easily, too practiced. Kyle blinked. "What?" Marius shrugged. "I just figured, given your history." Maris paused, fork hovering near her lips. "History?" Kyle's voice was low, controlled. "What are you talking about?" Marius looked from one to the other, eyebrows raised as if he'd misread the situation. "You didn't tell her?" "Tell me what?" Maris asked, more confused than concerned. Marius sat up straighter. "You know, the diagnosis. The thing from years back. I mean, the family always thought you'd go adoption or IVF just to be safe. I assumed you did." Silence fell like a dropped glass. Kyle's hands tightened beneath the table. He kept his face unreadable, but his mind raced. He could hear every clock tick, every breath, every shift in posture. Time had stretched, but only for him. "I'll clear the plates," Maris said gently, her tone wary. She stood, gathering dishes with careful fingers, as if even her movements might set something off. Marius, oblivious or uncaring, continued sipping his wine. Later that night, after Marius had gone, and the house had gone still, Kael stood at the window of their bedroom, eyes lost in the dark skyline. Maris joined him, quiet at first. "What did he mean?" she asked finally. Kael didn't answer. "Kael." He turned, slowly. His voice was flat. "It's nothing." Her face tightened, not in anger but concern. "Was there something you didn't tell me?" He looked at her for a long moment, then said, "It was years ago. A doctor said my chances of conceiving were low, less than 1%. I didn't think it mattered, but it does matter," she said softly. "Doesn't it?" Kael didn't respond. That night, sleep didn't come. He lay awake, the ceiling offering no comfort. 1%, a child on the way. A past diagnosis never shared. Had he let hope blind him? Or worse, had he ignored something that was never possible to begin with? In the morning, while Maris was still asleep, Kael pulled out the file. He kept it buried, tucked away in a drawer beneath financial records and corporate deeds. The folder was thin. 1 page, 1 sentence, 1 number, less than 1%. He stared at it again, as if the paper might give him different odds this time. Later that day, he found himself watching Maris from across the room. She was folding tiny clothes, humming softly, her fingers brushing over buttons and soft fabrics like blessings. She looked so sure, so at peace. Kael tried to speak, tried to tell her that something didn't feel right, but the words stayed behind his teeth. Instead, he just watched, and for the first time since the pregnancy began, he wondered, was I chosen for this, or kept in the dark? The days that followed carried a quietness Kael couldn't name, but he felt it, thick in the air between them. Maris noticed the change. She didn't push, but her glances lingered longer. Her touches became hesitant, as if she wasn't sure he'd reach back. Kael, for his part, said all the right things, but the warmth in his voice had dulled, and the ease in his movements had stiffened. He still kissed her cheek in the morning, still nodded at her stories, still helped choose colors for the changing table, but it all felt automatic, like someone mimicking himself from memory. One afternoon, Maris caught him staring at her belly again. She was curled on the couch, reading, and looked up to find his gaze fixed. Not tender, but distant. "What is it?" she asked softly. Kael blinked, as if waking from something. "Nothing, just thinking." "About what?" He forced a smile. "Future things." She nodded, but the ache in her chest said otherwise. That evening, Kael called an old contact at a private medical lab. Discreet, confidential, no names on record. He gave them a simple instruction. "I'll send you a sample after the baby arrives. I want confirmation." There was a pause on the other end of the line, then a quiet, "Understood." He ended the call with a stillness he didn't yet understand. At night, he'd sit alone in the nursery. The mobile spun lazily overhead. The crib was untouched. Still, Kael would run his hand over the edge of the mattress as though waiting for truth to take shape in the quiet. In the hallway, Maris would watch him from a distance. She knew he was drifting. She just didn't know why. One evening she approached him, voice calm. "You're somewhere else lately." Kael kept his eyes on the floor. "No, just tired." Tired doesn't make someone colder. He met her gaze finally, and for a moment, he considered telling her. About Marius, about the file, about the odds and the ache, but something held him back. Fear, shame, pride, maybe all three. In the weeks that followed, Kael became more helpful around the house, but less emotionally present. He assembled things, fixed things, organized and arranged. But when Maris laughed, he didn't always look up. When she placed his hand on her stomach to feel a kick, he tensed before relaxing. When she said, "He's getting stronger," Kael smiled, too quickly, too rehearsed. One afternoon, as he tightened a hinge on the crib, a thought returned, unwelcome and sharp. What if the strength she feels belongs to someone else's child? The idea hit him harder than expected. Not just jealousy, not just confusion, but something closer to grief. The grief of not knowing, the grief of not asking sooner, the grief of maybe not being needed at all. The file stayed in his desk. The unopened test kit, prepped and waiting, lay beneath a folder of contracts. Still, Kyle hadn't acted. He couldn't decide which version of the truth he feared more. That the child wasn't his. Or that. Maris never meant to tell him. On a quiet Sunday morning, as they folded laundry side by side, Maris suddenly asked, "Do you ever wonder if some truths can wait?" Kyle looked at her carefully. She went on, "Like, when you keep something not to hurt the person you love, but to protect them from the weight of it." He paused. "Is that still love?" Maris hesitated. "Sometimes, I think so." He nodded, slowly, but said nothing. "Let me ask you something. Do you believe some secrets protect more than they harm? Or does silence always become betrayal in the end? Let me know in the comments, because in Kyle's world, the silence wasn't just growing between them. It was about to speak louder than any truth ever could. Kyle stood in the hallway listening. The quiet hum of the dishwasher, the soft shuffle of Maris in the next room, humming lightly as she folded linens, the occasional sound of birds beyond the glass. Everything was ordinary, but inside his chest, nothing felt still. He moved toward the office, his steps silent. The door clicked shut behind him, slow and careful. He turned the lock. From the drawer, he pulled out a small padded envelope, plain, medical, coded. Inside, it was the DNA kit, unopened, waiting. His hands didn't shake. He'd done too much in life to be easily rattled. But there was a heaviness in his chest that sat low and immovable, like carrying a truth he hadn't earned yet. He opened the kit with steady fingers, cotton swabs, instructions, clear labels, everything methodical. He paused before continuing, just for a breath. What if this ruins everything? What if it saves me from a lie? Kyle had built his empire on certainty, numbers, logic, outcomes. But this wasn't logic. This was personal. This was doubt wearing a suit. The swabs were labeled. His were done quickly, clean, uncomplicated. He walked into the nursery next, slow, reverent. Alaric lay in the crib, sound asleep. His small chest rose and fell in soft rhythm, lips parted slightly, one hand curled near his cheek. Kyle crouched beside him, waited. He didn't want to do it. Not like this. But he also couldn't not know. With hands steadier than his mind, Kyle took the infant swab. One cheek, then the other. Alaric stirred, but didn't cry. Kyle exhaled through his nose, swallowed hard, and stood. He packed the envelope, sealed it, and tucked it beneath a stack of blueprints in the office. He walked into the kitchen afterward and kissed Maris on the forehead. She smiled, handed him a glass of water, and went back to arranging baby bottles in a new cabinet. She never asked what he had done in those quiet minutes, and he never offered. That night, Kyle lay in bed staring at the ceiling, sleep nowhere close. Maris was beside him, breathing slow and even. He glanced at her hand resting near his, the same hand that had reached for him in moments of doubt, the same hand that had once written love notes on napkins during her lunch breaks just to leave them in his briefcase. He stared at her wedding ring, not because it was symbolic, but because it reminded him of promises. Promises based on things he hadn't questioned until now. The next morning, he dropped the envelope into a private courier box under a different name. No trace, no alerts. It was done, and with it, something shifted inside him. A crack he had tried to ignore now made itself known. Days passed with no word. Kyle went through the motions. He attended a meeting on a tech investment, but barely registered the slides. He approved a grant for an arts program Maris had once supported, but forgot the follow-up call. He even missed a moment when Alaric reached for his hand while lying in his crib. His body was present, but his mind was fixed on a single truth still out of reach. The email came 4 days later. No subject line, no greeting, just an attached document. Kyle didn't open it immediately. He stared at the screen for over a minute, long enough to hear the hallway clock chime once. When he clicked it open, the lines were short, standard, scientific, but one line pulled all the air from the room. Probability of paternity, 0%. Kyle closed the laptop slowly. He didn't move, didn't blink, didn't breathe, at least not the way a man breathes when the world makes sense. Across the room, Maris sat by the window, feeding Alaric. Her voice was soft, a lullaby she'd written herself, the kind of song that only made sense to two people, mother and child. Kyle watched her lips move, the curve of her body as she leaned in close, the gentle hum, the affection in her fingers. It was real, but the paper said otherwise. He stood, walked slowly. Every step felt unfamiliar. He didn't plan his words. There was no strategy, just ache. Maris looked up when he entered. "You're home early," she said, smiling. He didn't answer. She looked again, reading his face. "What is it?" Maris stood slowly, one hand resting on Alaric's back. Kyle's eyes were locked on her, unblinking. She looked confused at first, unsure where his voice had come from, the edge in it, the sorrow. "What truth?" she asked, carefully. He swallowed hard. His jaw tensed before he spoke again. "I know he's not mine." The words fell between them, heavy and unmoving. Maris blinked, stunned. For a moment, her mouth opened as if to deny it, but then she didn't. Instead, her body folded slightly, like someone being forced to sit under invisible weight. "You tested him," she said softly. Kyle nodded. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Alaric cooed, breaking the silence. Maris kissed his forehead and gently placed him in the bassinet. Her fingers lingered on the blanket, as if buying time, as if hoping silence might undo what had already been said. When she turned to Kyle again, her eyes were glistening. "I was going to tell you," she whispered. "I just didn't know how." He didn't move. "When?" "I don't know," she answered. "Maybe after you held him. After you saw he was still yours." "He's not mine," Kyle said, the edge sharper now. Maris flinched, not from volume, but the finality in his voice. "He is," she said quickly. "Not by blood, I know, but—" "Kyle, please listen." He didn't interrupt, but his silence was not permission. It was distance. So she continued. "I found the report. The one from your doctor," she began. "Months ago. It was mixed in with those grant files you asked me to organize." Kyle's brow furrowed. "I didn't know how to bring it up. You'd never told me, and I thought maybe you were protecting yourself, or maybe it hurt too much to talk about. So you made the decision for both of us?" She nodded slowly. "Yes, I did." Her honesty was brutal in its simplicity. "I contacted a private agency. They don't use traditional donors. They pair women with high match profiles. It's discreet, and the embryo is matched with your blood type and medical compatibility. I chose a path that wouldn't hurt you." Kyle looked like he'd forgotten how to stand. His voice came quieter now, but no softer. "So, you knew all along he wouldn't be mine?" Maris looked down. "I knew biologically, no. But I believed, with everything in me, that love would make him yours." He stepped back, as if the words themselves had pushed him. "You thought love would fix a lie. I thought love would carry us through one," she replied. The room felt colder now. The walls hadn't changed, neither had the light. But something between them had snapped, not loud, not violent, just quietly, with no way to go back. Kyle ran a hand down his face, pacing to the far wall. He stared out the window for a long while, then turned back. "I've fought for everything in my life, every contract, every deal, every inch of progress. But this I let myself believe without a question." She stepped closer, but he took another step back. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He looked at her, truly looked. And for the first time in their relationship, he didn't recognize her. "You should have told me," he said finally. "From the moment you knew." "I was afraid," she admitted. So was I, Kyle replied. But I still would have chosen him. I would have chosen you. A pause. I don't know if I can do that now. Maris's eyes filled. She didn't plead, didn't chase. She just nodded. I understand. Kyle turned toward the hallway. He didn't pack, didn't slam the door, didn't say goodbye. He just left. And in that silence, Maris dropped to her knees beside the crib, one hand over her mouth, the other reaching for the baby who would never understand the price of the truth she tried to hide with love. If you were in Kyle's shoes, what would you have done? Would you walk away from someone who hid the truth, even if they did it with love? Or would you try to forgive, knowing some choices are made in fear, not malice? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear your truth. The house was quiet now. Kyle's absence lived in the silence, not loud but undeniable. Every drawer he used to open, every mug left in the sink. The space he filled now felt wider than it should have. Maris sat in the nursery, barefoot, knees to her chest. Her eyes were fixed on the name above the crib, Alaric, bold in wooden letters. She whispered his name once, then closed her eyes. And just like that, her mind went back. It was almost a year ago. Kyle had just returned from an exhausting business trip, worn thinner than she'd ever seen him. He looked older in the face, not from age, but from invisible weight. That night, she offered to help him organize documents, small things that gave her a sense of participation in a world she wasn't born into. She never meant to find the folder. It was sandwiched between quarterly reports and philanthropic budgets, unlabeled, tucked too neatly to be accidental. She shouldn't have opened it. But she did. She remembered standing there, heart pounding, reading words she didn't understand at first. The report was clinical, detached. She had to look up the terminology. But once she understood, the world around her shifted. Kyle couldn't have children, or almost certainly couldn't. She sat down on the floor, folder still open in her lap. It wasn't the diagnosis that crushed her. It was the fact that he had never told her. For days she said nothing. She smiled, cooked, kissed him goodnight, but inside she wrestled with it. Was it shame? Was he protecting her? Or had he convinced himself it wasn't real? She wanted to ask, but something in Kyle's guarded silence made her feel like trespassing into his vulnerability would only push him away. So, she made a choice. One morning, after Kyle had left for a board meeting, Maris stood in front of the bathroom mirror and whispered the words out loud. I want to give him a family. They didn't sound dramatic. They didn't sound desperate. They sounded true. She began her research quietly. No late-night searches, no obvious appointments. Everything done discreetly through a friend of a friend in the wellness industry who referred her to a private agency known for working with high-profile couples and individuals in non-traditional paths to parenthood. The process wasn't simple. She learned terms she never expected to: donor match, implantation timelines, medical prep. But what stayed with her most was the consultation. The doctor had been calm and kind, a middle-aged woman with a steady voice. After explaining the steps, the woman asked gently, "Do you want to tell your partner?" Maris stared at the floor. "He's private." The woman nodded. "Some people share everything. Others wait until they feel safe." Maris looked up. "Is that wrong?" The doctor gave a soft answer. "Sometimes truth has a timing. You'll know yours." Maris underwent weeks of preparation, hormonal cycles, blood work, appointments masked as theater-related checkups. She told no one, not because she was ashamed, but because this was sacred. This was her offering, her devotion, her love made tangible. The embryo transfer was scheduled quietly. She sat alone in the recovery room, one hand on her abdomen, praying, not to a God she had grown up with, but to whatever force allowed love to keep growing, even when it wasn't understood. When the test came back positive, she cried, but not from fear, from relief. She had done it. She had chosen him, without asking him to bear the pain of knowing he couldn't choose this for himself. But the joy didn't last untouched. There were nights Kyle would rest his hand on her belly and say, "I can't believe this is real." She'd smile, nod, pretend it was a shared disbelief, but inside, a knot formed. What happens when you've given someone everything they wanted, but didn't ask permission to give it? She told herself she'd explain after the baby was born. She imagined the moment, holding Alaric together, feeling the depth of connection so strong it wouldn't matter who provided the cells. She believed in that future. She needed to believe in that future. Maris hadn't moved from the nursery floor since Kyle left. Hours had passed, though the light outside hadn't changed much. Afternoon, that soft space between day and night where time loses definition. Alaric had drifted into another nap. She sat beside the crib, her back against the wall, hands limp in her lap. The silence no longer offered peace. It echoed. She kept replaying his words, not the sharp ones, but the quiet ones, the ones that sounded like doors closing. She had always known it was a risk. There had been moments, small ones, when she'd questioned the timing, the ethics, the assumptions, but each time she circled back to the same belief. If it's done in love, it can't be wrong. That belief felt thinner now, not because she loved him any less, but because she finally understood that love, even in its purest form, doesn't exempt us from consequences. She rose slowly and walked to the window. From there, she could see the street Kyle had driven down earlier, the same route he always took when he needed space. She wondered where he was now. If he was thinking of her, if he was holding anger, or just grief. Maris pressed her forehead to the glass. He had said, "I still would have chosen him." That's what stayed with her, not the accusation, not even the silence, but that sentence, "I still would have chosen him." She had assumed protecting him from that truth would shield him from shame. She had thought giving him a child, even if not by blood, would prove her loyalty in a way words never could. She never thought it would leave them here. Separate, wounded, uncertain. The agency had offered anonymity for a reason. It protected couples from complications. It allowed things to feel whole, even if the science was layered. But now, as she stared at the crib and the tiny body inside it, Maris wondered, did I give him a family? Or take something from him without asking? There had been moments during the process when she could have stopped, when the forms were still unsigned, when the doctor asked again, "Are you sure you don't want to include your partner in this decision?" She'd smiled, said yes, because she believed, because she loved. She walked over to the bassinet and leaned over gently. Alaric stirred, his eyes opened just enough to recognize her, and then closed again. Maris traced her finger across his forehead. "You're still the best decision I've ever made," she whispered. A pause, "but I'm not sure if I made it the right way." She sat back down and took out her journal, the one Kyle had given her their first holiday together, the one with her name embossed in the corner and a blank page left intentionally untouched. She turned to the first clean page and began to write. "He found out before I could tell him, and now I don't know if he'll ever look at me the same way again. I never lied to hurt him. I lied because I thought I was doing something good, but good intentions don't always feel good in the end. Sometimes they burn worse than malice because they come from a place that was meant to heal. If he never comes back, I'll still be grateful for every moment we had. But if he ever reads this, I hope he knows I did it out of love. But maybe..." That wasn't enough. Kyle didn't remember much of the drive, just the road ahead, lit in short bursts by passing lights. Hands on the wheel, steady, but only because they had nowhere else to go. He didn't cry. He didn't shout. He just left. And when he arrived at the mountain estate, the quiet didn't welcome him. It surrounded him like fog. He stepped inside, dropped his keys on the entry table, and stood still. No sounds, no voices, no heartbeat except his own. The house was cold, not from weather, but absence. Rooms untouched, chairs unused, cabinets filled with dishes no one would serve from. Kyle walked past it all and into the study, closed the door, sat in the leather chair by the fire that wasn't lit. He stared at nothing. 2 days passed before he unpacked a single bag. Even then, he only removed the basics: socks, undershirts, a pair of sweats. He left the rest untouched, as if admitting permanence would make the pain official. He didn't turn on the TV. He didn't answer calls. His assistant texted once about a board vote. He ignored it. The only sound in the house came from the occasional groan of wood under the winter air. At night, he barely slept. He'd sit at the edge of the bed, elbows on his knees, eyes on the floor. The same words kept circling. I did it out of love. He's still your son. You should have told me. He couldn't decide which part hurt more, that Maris had chosen for him, or that he had believed so completely in something that turned out to be a version of the truth, not the whole of it. One morning, he made coffee, then let it sit untouched until it went cold. He stood by the window, watching as snow settled over the driveway, light at first, then heavier, a slow white sheet covering the world outside. He could see his car out there, already half buried. No tracks, no signs of life. That felt about right. Kyle never imagined he'd be the one to leave. He'd always thought love was about staying. But now, every hour alone brought new questions. Was the betrayal the lie itself, or the silence that followed it? Was Maris trying to protect him, or protect herself from his reaction? If love is real, why does it hurt this much to be near it? He didn't answer any of them. He just poured the cold coffee down the sink and said nothing. Maris checked her phone again. Still nothing. No missed calls, no unread messages, just silence. She hadn't left the house, not because she was waiting, but because moving felt pointless. The nursery was the only room she still entered with purpose. She kept Alaric close, speaking softly to him, telling him about colors, lullabies, stories he wouldn't understand for years. It helped distract her from the growing truth Kyle hadn't said when he'd return. He hadn't said if. One afternoon, she wrote him a letter, then another. By the end of the week, there were 5, each different, some full of apology, others filled with memories. One simply told him how Alaric had laughed for the first time at a rattle she shook too hard by accident. She didn't know if he would read them. She only knew that writing made her feel closer to the part of him that still might care. Back in the mountains, Kyle opened his email once to forward documents to legal. That's when he saw a calendar reminder. Family, 2nd trimester milestone. He stared at it. Clicked dismiss. Closed the laptop. He stepped outside just once that day. The cold air struck his lungs, sharp and grounding. Snow coated the yard. Clean, untouched, the kind of quiet that demanded nothing and gave nothing back. He stood there for a long while, hands in his coat pockets. Part of him wanted to forgive, not just her, but himself, for letting hope grow without asking the right questions, for trusting love so deeply he never thought to prepare for betrayal, for believing someone would never keep something so large from him, especially her. But the weight of that hope was now the reason he couldn't step forward. He didn't know who he was with her anymore. Still, he couldn't delete her letters. He read the first one, twice. The second, he folded slowly and placed on his desk. The third made him set it down midway through, hand over his face. He hadn't let himself feel much, but now, sitting by the fireplace with a half-burned log and a letter in his lap, Kyle exhaled for the first time in what felt like days. A deep, tired sound, not from exhaustion, from heartbreak. Do you think true love can survive betrayal? When someone hides a truth for what they believe is the right reason, does the intent soften the damage? Let's talk about it below. I want to know how you see it, not just with your mind, but with your heart. The first letter arrived 2 days after Kyle had stopped reading his emails. It was hand-delivered, no return address, just his name written in Maris's familiar script. He stared at it for half an hour before opening it. Letter 1, Kyle. This isn't a plea. I'm not asking you to forgive me yet. I just want to tell you things I never found the right moment to say. The day we met at the theater fundraiser, I knew you were important to me. Not because you were Kyle Moreau, but because you watched me for who I really was. No mask, no title, just me. You gave me a quiet kind of safety I never knew I needed. And somewhere between that coffee you didn't drink and the ride I refused, I fell. I've made a mess of that love now. I know, but please, let me remind you what we were before the silence grew louder than the truth. He read it twice, then folded it gently and set it beside his chair. The second came the next day, same envelope, same handwriting. He didn't hesitate this time. Letter 2. You once told me legacy isn't about money. That real legacy is what people remember when your name isn't in the headlines anymore. Alaric is your legacy, not because he carries your blood, but because he carries your stillness. Your eyes when he concentrates, the same quiet strength you move through the world with. I didn't choose biology over honesty. I chose love over fear. But I see now how love, if misdirected, can become a burden instead of a gift. I'm sorry I didn't give you the chance to choose him with open eyes, but you need to know, everything I did was because I saw you as the kind of man who deserved to be called Dad. Kyle pressed his forehead to the window that evening. He didn't cry, not yet, but something inside him softened, not into forgiveness, but into recognition. Letter 3 came folded inside a baby photo. Alaric grinning, a blanket twisted around him like a makeshift cape. Kyle ran his thumb over the image for a long time. Letter 3. Today he laughed at the ceiling fan. No reason, just found it funny, I guess. You would have said something smart about airflow or symmetry. I would have ignored you and called him brilliant. We were always like that. You, explaining the science of wonder. Me, choosing to believe in magic. I miss that balance. I miss you. But I'm not writing to pull you back with guilt. I'm writing because love doesn't switch off when people make mistakes. It just waits, and hopes, and prays the other person still sees the truth behind the pain. That night, Kyle didn't sleep at all. He kept the letter in his hand, reread it, folded it, unfolded it again, as if repetition might bring clarity. Letter 4 arrived 2 days later. This one didn't talk about the baby. It was about them. Letter 4. Do you remember the night we ate takeout on the floor of the nursery, before it had a crib? You said you never thought you'd build anything more important than your company. And then you looked at me, really looked, and said, this feels bigger. That night, you fell asleep with your hand on my stomach. I laid awake until morning, wondering how I got lucky enough to be the one you finally let in. I didn't hide the surrogacy to betray you. I hid it because I couldn't bear to see you hurt. I thought, if I could just hold you through it, maybe it wouldn't hurt at all. I was wrong. And I'm sorry. Kyle sat on the porch with the letter folded in his palm, eyes closed, wind brushing over his face. That night, he started a fire for the first time since arriving. He didn't feel warm, but he no longer felt frozen. The 5th letter came in a red envelope, not bright, not dramatic, a muted red, the color of dried rose petals. Kyle turned it over in his hands for a long time before opening it. There was no photo this time, just ink, just paper, just her voice. Letter 5. I don't know what else I can give you now, except the version of me you once loved, the one who met you, at the edge of a stage, notebook in hand, already writing the story before she knew how it would end. I've played that night in my head more times than I can count, but the one memory that won't let me go is one you may have forgotten. We were in the bookstore, the little one between the tailor and the bakery. It was raining, and you picked up a poetry collection and read aloud a line without even looking up. You said love, when honest, is rarely tidy, but if it's real, it stays through the mess. And I remember laughing, telling you that sounded like someone who'd never had to clean up the mess himself, but you looked at me and said, no, I just never had someone worth staying for. You were worth staying for, Kyle. You still are, even if you never come back. Even if this chapter ends in silence. You should know one thing with no doubt at all. I did it out of love, but maybe that wasn't enough. I will never stop being sorry, and I will never stop loving the man who made me believe that home wasn't a place, but a person. Kyle finished reading and lowered the page to his lap. The fire was low now. The last piece of wood was split in the center, glowing but slowly dimming. He sat in silence, mouth parted slightly, eyes unfocused. And then it hit him. not in a loud, dramatic way, but in the quiet, undeniable rush of everything he had buried. Kyle bent forward, elbows to knees, the letter still crumpled in one hand. His breath caught, his shoulders shook, not from cold, but from the effort of holding it all in. He didn't sob, he didn't collapse. He simply broke. The kind of break that doesn't make a sound, the kind that lives behind the eyes, where the deepest truths wait to be faced. He pressed the letter to his chest, and for the first time since walking out, he whispered her name, not in anger, not in regret, just Maris. The snow had been falling for hours. Not the kind that flurried in dramatic gusts, but the quiet kind. Soft, unhurried, as though the world was making space for something delicate to happen. Maris sat alone in the living room, wrapped in the same blanket she had slept with every night since he left. The house was mostly dark, save for the glow from the hallway lamp, just enough to light the baby monitor on the coffee table. Alaric had been restless that day, as if he sensed something was about to shift. Now he was finally asleep. Maris exhaled slowly, running her fingers along the edge of her mug. The tea had gone cold hours ago. She didn't drink it anymore. She just held it. There were no more letters to send, no more words to shape the ache. She had said all she could say. Outside, a car slowed on the icy street. Its headlights crept across the front porch, then cut out. Maris didn't move. A second passed, then another. Footsteps crunched slowly up the walk. She stood before she even knew why. The doorbell never rang. Instead, a single knock. Firm, then silence. Her breath caught. When she opened the door, the cold swept in behind him. Kyle stood there, snow clinging to his coat, his hair dusted white at the edges. He looked older, or maybe just softer. His eyes held no anger now, only something unfinished. In his hand was a small stuffed rabbit, the same one Maris had once, pointed out in a shop window and said would look perfect in the crib. She hadn't seen it since before the baby was born. No words were exchanged. She stepped aside. He walked in. The house hadn't changed. Still quiet, still carrying echoes of laughter that hadn't been heard in weeks. Kyle said nothing as he moved down the hallway. He didn't hesitate at the nursery door. He turned the knob slowly, the soft creak of hinges louder than expected in the stillness. Alaric lay sleeping, his tiny hands curled near his face, his breaths even and warm. Kyle stepped inside. The stuffed rabbit hung loosely from his fingers. He crouched beside the crib, his eyes scanning every inch of his son's face. The soft cheeks, the slight frown that formed during sleep, the curl of hair on his forehead. The child didn't stir. Kyle didn't reach out. Not yet. He just watched. A long moment passed. Then, with a whisper that barely made it into the air, he said, "Hey, little star." The words broke something, not in pain, but in stillness. They were the words he had whispered to the empty nursery months ago, back when he thought fatherhood would come through ease, back before truth bent his world sideways. He reached in and gently placed the rabbit beside Alaric. The boy stirred slightly, his face turning toward the sound of his voice, as if he recognized something deeper than memory. Kyle smiled, a tired, quiet kind of smile. He stood slowly, not wanting to wake the child, but as he turned, he saw her in the doorway. Maris. She hadn't moved. Her hands gripped the edge of the frame, her eyes unreadable, their gazes locked. No blame, no defenses, just the silent ache of two people who had both broken something and still longed to mend it. Kyle cleared his throat gently. "I can't pretend it didn't hurt," he said. "It did, and maybe it still does." Her lips parted slightly, but she didn't interrupt. He continued, "But I also can't pretend that I don't love you. Or him. I tried. I really tried." She stepped forward slowly, tears starting to well. "I never wanted to hurt you," she whispered. Kyle nodded once. "I know." A pause filled the room. But it wasn't cold. It was careful, like a breath held at the edge of a beginning. He looked back toward the crib. "I don't have all the answers," he said. But I don't want to miss another moment with him, and I don't want to keep punishing us for something I can finally see came from love. Even if it was messy. She walked closer until they were only inches apart. His hand brushed against hers. They didn't kiss. They didn't embrace. They just stood, side by side, both facing the child they made space for, even if not in the traditional way. For the first time in months, silence didn't feel like something heavy. It felt earned. It felt like rest. Later that night, Kyle didn't go back to the guest room. He didn't make declarations or give timelines. He just walked into the master bedroom, placed his watch back in the drawer, and changed into the sleep clothes still folded in the bottom of the dresser, untouched since the day he left. Maris didn't say anything. She simply curled beneath the sheets, watching him in the dim light. Before turning off the lamp, he looked at her and whispered, "Thank you for waiting." She replied, "Thank you for coming home." And for the first time in a long time, they slept without dreams. The first real change wasn't dramatic. It came quietly, like a door creaking open that had been sealed for too long. Kyle was still cautious, still guarded, but he was home. He didn't move back into the master bedroom right away. He took the guest room and offered no explanation. Maris didn't ask for one. She only placed a clean set of sheets on the bed and left the door ajar. That night, the house no longer felt empty. Not healed, but no longer hollow. Weeks passed, and routines began to find them. Kyle started attending therapy sessions alone. He didn't speak much during the first few, but when he did, the words came out sharp and precise. He spoke about how trust, once cracked, didn't heal like skin. It healed like glass, fragile even when repaired. But still, it could hold water again. Later, when Maris joined him for a session, she listened more than she spoke. When she finally did, her voice was quiet. "I wasn't trying to protect myself. I was trying to protect you from a grief I thought you didn't need to feel again." Kyle didn't respond right away, but he didn't walk out either, and that, to both of them, was something. One evening, Kyle came home from the office holding a plastic bag with the wrong brand of formula. Maris opened the cupboard to correct him, then stopped. He looked tired. Not from business meetings, but from caring. She said nothing, and fed Alaric with what he'd brought. That night, Kyle sat in the rocking chair longer than usual, even after the baby had fallen asleep. Maris walked past the nursery and saw him holding Alaric close, eyes half shut, lost in something quiet and private. She didn't interrupt. She just stood there for a moment and smiled. There was a small dinner one Saturday, just the three of them. Kyle had tried to make pasta from scratch and ended up ruining half of it. Maris laughed, and Kyle rolled his eyes, handing her a glass of wine. Alaric banged a spoon on the table and burst out giggling. For the first time in what felt like years, they laughed together. Not politely, not cautiously, but the kind of laughter that fills the spaces where pain used to live. At bedtime, Kyle began reading Alaric short stories, always the same one first. A story about a boy who didn't know who his father was, but knew someone loved him enough to stay. One night, after the last line, Kyle closed the book slowly and whispered, "You're not mine by science, but you're mine all the same." Outside on the porch, Maris stood with 2 mugs. She handed one to Kyle. They stood in silence for a while, watching the moon rise over the trees. He finally spoke. "Did you think I'd come back?" She exhaled. "No, but I hoped you would come back different, and you did." He nodded once. The wind moved gently through the night. No promises were made, no old titles reclaimed, but the distance between them had changed. It was no longer sharp. It was soft now. Over the following months, they rebuilt something new. Not what they had before, that was gone, but what came after was built on different ground. No secrets, no assumptions, just shared moments, folding laundry, holding a child, listening without defense. One night, Maris left a manuscript on the kitchen counter. Kyle read it in full before bed. It was a story about 2 people who loved each other, but didn't understand how to love through pain, only around it. In the final scene, the characters meet on a bench, years later. No confessions, just a shared apple between them, passed back and forth in silence. Kyle left her a note on the manuscript the next morning. "I'm not done passing the apple." It wasn't poetic, but it was real. And that was what Maris had always wanted. The first family photo they took was candid. Alaric reaching for Kyle's tie, tugging it sideways while Maris laughed mid-blink. It wasn't framed perfectly, but they kept it on the mantle, because it was theirs. If you believe, love deserves a second chance. Share this story with someone who needs to remember that healing takes time, and that broken things can still hold beauty again. What do we take from this? From Kyle's quiet unraveling, from Maris's impossible decision, from a child born not of ease but intention? What do we carry from a love that broke open and still chose to rebuild? Let's sit with it, not rush past it, and listen. There are 4 lessons in this story. They aren't simple, but neither is love. Lesson 1. Love isn't clean. It's carved. Kyle and Maris didn't meet in a world designed to test them, but life found a way to test them anyway. They had different currencies. Kyle traded in logic, precision, and silence. Maris lived by feeling, instinct, and dreams. And yet, they loved. But love, when real, does not come prepackaged. It is chiseled, moment by moment, heartbreak by heartbeat. It isn't something you fall into and float with. It's something you build, tend to, and sometimes grieve while still inside it. Their love wasn't flawless, but it was chosen. So if you're hoping for a love that's easy, you may wait forever. But if you're willing to fight kindly, to listen even when it hurts, and to stay after silence, then maybe you've already found the kind of love worth keeping. Lesson 2. Truth, delayed, can feel like betrayal, even when it's meant to protect. Maris didn't lie to hurt. She acted out of care, fear, and pressure, the same emotions that drive so many of us into silence. But here's the thing. Intentions matter. Yes, but timing does too. When truth arrives late, it doesn't land gently. It crashes, and sometimes it takes years to sweep up the mess. So here's the takeaway. Speak early. Speak messy. Speak when you're unsure. Because even a hard truth delivered in love is easier to bear than a gentle lie stretched across time. Lesson 3. Family isn't made by biology. It's made by presence. Kyle didn't share Alaric's DNA. He didn't pass along a name rooted in centuries. What he gave was time. What he gave was touch. What he gave was consistency. And that's what shaped the boy. You don't need blood to belong to someone. You don't need ancestry to be called dad. You just need to show up, even when it's hard, even when it's late, even when you're unsure if you still fit. Because the people who stand with you after the storm are your people. Lesson 4. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past. It allows you to build after it. Forgiveness is not amnesia. Kyle never forgot the test. Maris never forgot the nights she cried into a pillow, unsure if he'd ever return. They didn't wipe the slate clean. They carved new space next to the scars. Forgiveness, real forgiveness, says, I see what happened. I feel what it did. I still choose to stay, not because it didn't matter, but because you still do. And sometimes, that is enough. Not perfect, but enough. So what's the lesson in all of this? Maybe it's that love isn't about never breaking. It's about who helps you gather the pieces. If this story spoke to something in you, don't keep it to yourself. Someone out there is holding their breath, waiting for a sign that love, even in its messiest form, is still worth believing in. Share this. Talk about it. And if you're lucky enough to have someone you love, tell them today. The velvet curtains of the community theater hung heavy, just as they had years ago. Rows of modest wooden seats faced the stage where so many quiet dreams had once been spoken into life, including hers. Maris sat near the front, her hand laced in Kyle's. His grip was firm, but his thumb rubbed lightly along hers, a silent rhythm he only used when he was trying not to cry. Tonight wasn't about them. Tonight was about the boy who had become their anchor, their teacher, their reason to fight. Alaric stood center stage, holding a paper in his slightly trembling hands, wearing a button-down that was too big at the shoulders. His hair was swept back, just like Kyl's. His eyes, fierce and gentle, mirrored Maris. But more than that, he carried a presence that belonged to no one else. The theater lights warmed his face as he began. This is a monologue I wrote myself. It's called Kindness Finds a Way Back. Maris felt her breath catch. Kyle blinked hard. The boy spoke without notes. No stumble, no fear. There are stories we tell to feel brave, and stories we tell to remember where we come from. But this one is about the people who stayed, even when it was hard. I don't know everything about how I got here. I know some parts of my story were difficult. I know some choices were made that changed everything. But what I also know is this. I was never unloved, not even once, because sometimes being family means staying in the room when someone is hurting. It means telling the truth, even when your voice shakes, and it means forgiving without keeping score. The room fell still. Not even a breath dared interrupt him. I know my parents aren't perfect, but I also know they never stopped choosing each other, and I've learned that real love doesn't leave when it gets uncomfortable. It leans in. Kyle squeezed Maris's hand, not hard, but full. She glanced over and saw a tear tracking silently down his cheek. He didn't wipe it away. He let it stay. If someone ever asks me what I learned growing up, I'll say this. Love is a choice we make more than once. Forgiveness is what we do when we remember why we loved in the first place. And kindness? Kindness finds a way back, every time. The audience didn't erupt with applause right away. They sat still, as if sacred ground had just been spoken into. Then slowly, a ripple of hands met together. It wasn't thunderous. It was steady, like a heartbeat, like coming home. Backstage, after the lights dimmed, Alaric ran straight into his parents' arms. Kyle crouched low, arms wide. Maris bent forward, already crying, already laughing. He fit perfectly between them. No gaps, no questions, just love, shaped, weathered, honest. They had made it, not to a fairy tale, but to a truth stronger than fantasy. A truth they earned, together.